Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another edition of Sirhan on X, live from Cincinnati, Ohio, in the United States. Hope everyone had themselves a wonderful 14th of January in the calendar year 2025. Weather-wise for me hasn't been the greatest because we're supposed to hit frigid temperatures tonight. So I'm standing here while everybody is out there doing what they want to do in what's going to be 0 degree weather. Make sure you guys bundle up pretty darn good if you're going to go out in that kind of a weather because that's not for me. I have to go work in it tomorrow. I have to drive in my work commute, which is fine, but I don't do anything in the outdoors anyways. Earlier show because I have stuff going on. I have a couple spaces I got to do, and of course I got to go back to the grind tomorrow once I'm done. But hope everyone has themselves a wonderful day. See, I got this thing going again, staying warm and cozy, and what's supposed to flirt with 3 degrees or even as low as zero with a negative wind chill over here. And if you're going to go in this weather, make sure you have a real reason to go out into this weather because it is not worth it. I mean, I remember a couple of the playoff game here in Cincinnati between the Bengals and the Raiders. It was that frigidly cold. We had a bunch of loose cannons who thought it was cool to go in this weather, which I don't know why, but kudos to them for at least surviving it. But it's not for me. Now, to the show today is more boxing eccentric, but touch on a couple NFL things. Of course, last night the capper of the wild card weekend was the Rams just demolishing the Vikings. The Rams defense just absolutely begludgeoned and destroyed the Vikings offensive line and Sam Darnold, sacking him 9 times. Darnold not necessarily playing the greatest games in the world. Of course, it's led to all kinds of what's going to happen to him in the offseason. I think someone's going to still try to pay him, but I'd be surprised if it's in a Minnesota Viking uniform because they've already said they're going to go into next season with J.J. McCarthy should he fully recover from that meniscus surgery he had in the preseason. But for the Rams, stellar performance. Matthew Stafford was great. The defense was just absolutely lights out. I mean, they picked Sam Darnold off a couple times, beat him up, destroyed that Vikings O line. They'll be going to Philly. I think it will be a very contrast in styles matchup when those two go at it. I think it's this. I believe it's this Sunday that they're going at it. That's going to be the matchup. I'm going to touch on that later on in the week. But that's good. I think that's going to be a very contrast in styles type matchup when you consider how the Rams play versus how the Eagles play. You know, the Rams are their two receivers, Puka Nacua and Cooper Kupp. And of course, you have Saquon Barkley leading the Eagles. I think that's going to be a phenomenal game when they play this coming Sunday. Touch more on that this weekend when we get to closer to the divisional round. And of course, with it, the offseason is the Black Monday. And it continues now. The coaching carousel, again, continues to show itself. Of course, Dallas and Mike McCarthy part ways. Of course, the weird thing is, it was like a couple days before where Dallas was denying teams like the Bears and the Raiders permission to talk to Mike McCarthy. I think the Saints were also into it. But of course, 2 days later, it was revealed that Mike McCarthy and Jerry Jones were going to part ways. And what another blunder by Jerry Jones per usual. Now, of course, as I said before, when it came to Jerry Jones, think about what he did in 1994 when he fired Jimmy Johnson. Shoot, even before that, when he fired Tom Landry. I mean, you're talking about the Dallas Cowboys icon with that big hat. I mean, I can miss Tom Landry. Firing Tom Landry and Jimmy Johnson says all you need to know about what Jerry Jones is, who he is, and what he's all about. No surprise, this comes to an end here. Of course, McCarthy's getting interviews with the Bears. I heard now the Saints is going to be involved. Now, apparently, Dallas reached out to Deion Sanders at the University of Colorado, which doesn't surprise me because Deion Sanders is a driven, money-hungry drama queen, just like Jerry Jones is. You get two driven, money-hungry drama queens. You put them together. That's going to be the hand-in-glove fit in Dallas. Don't be surprised if that is Dallas's hire because we know how much Jerry loves Deion and how much Deion loves Jerry and Big D. Wouldn't be surprised if that's a final hire because I don't know who else they're going to go after because this is a crazy look for Dallas. But for McCarthy, he'll probably get another opportunity somewhere, probably Chicago. I heard the Saints were interested. We'll see where that goes. Of course, the other day, as I said, I predicted at all of my shows and podcasts and X Spaces that the final hire for the Patriots was going to be Mike Vrabel. It made too much sense. They wanted Vrabel. I did try to talk to him a couple days ago. Last season. Of course, that wasn't given a chance because Bill Belichick wouldn't relish a spot. He was, of course, at the time, sort of in his own weird way, vouching for Gerard Mayo. Of course, we know what happened there. Belichick and Kraft part ways. They hired Mayo. They go, I think it's 4-13, and Mayo gets the axe. So this was going to happen, not a matter if, but a matter of when. The second they fired Mayo, it was just a matter of, putting the pen to paper, dotting the I's, crossing the T's. That's what happened. Good luck down the line, New England Patriots. Of course, another news in Atlanta, it is the Atlanta Falcons interviewing the former Bengals defensive coordinator Lou Anarumo. Of course, his one-time safety Jesse Bates is over there. And of course, everybody in Cincinnati knows what happened to the defense once they let Jesse Bates walk. And now Lou Anarumo wants Jesse Bates look like they may reunite down there in Atlanta. I think it'll be a fantastic hire for the Falcons, whose defense was just not to be found in key games, especially down the stretch when they needed to get a win or two to try and salvage the NFC South from the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So if they get Lou, I think it's an upgrade. They have the personnel there, just don't know if the schematics worked or didn't work. And if you're Cincinnati and you're seeing this with Lou Anarumo, you better hit this defensive coordinator out of the ballpark. There's talks about Patrick Graham of the Raiders, who should be your number one choice. Should be Patrick Graham or bust for your defensive coordinators. Because if you think anybody else is going to do that kind of a job, you're a failure. You're talking about Matt Eberflus, who was an intentional failure in Chicago. Wade Martindale, who was the one-time defensive coordinator for both the Ravens and the Giants. Excuse me here. And also, someone tried to push Mike Zimmer, who was once a defensive coordinator here in Cincinnati. That didn't turn out well. So, let's see here. Sorry to interrupt. But yeah, they were talking about Mike Zimmer coming over here. I think that's not a good idea because I think that ship sailed, and he wasn't that good in Dallas anyways. So that's where all that goes. Of course, the coaching carousel, probably the wildest I've ever seen, with all the names doing interviews. Also there's rumors that people are waiting for what's going on with after the college football playoff game with the coordinators for Notre Dame and Ohio State, because Al Golden, the D coordinator for Notre Dame, has been linked to a couple jobs. We'll see where that one goes. So as my free talk with the NFL field, I'll be talking more NFL in the spaces here later tonight on a particular group over in the X platform. You're welcome to join me there. I'll be having more discussion. Of course, this week, probably the first full week, we got to get the feel of the upcoming boxing schedule of the year. Of course, the big hub is, of course, the supposed rumor between Canelo Alvarez and Terrence Crawford. I'm still appalled how many people want to see this, but I'll just say this. If it happens, I'll join in. I'm going to wait for the official word to come out, because it's not what we're talking about right now. Canelo Alvarez fans are going to have their say. Terrence Crawford fans are going to have their say. I'll just say my piece I'll just save what I'm going to say about it until the official result is here. They say they're in, quote, negotiation, end quote. But again, it's negotiation, and we know how negotiations go. And of course, one of the real sparking news right off the bat in 2025 is the status of Teofimo Lopez. His promoter, Bob Arum, came out today and said he gave Teo the offer to fight Subriel Matias, and he even offered more to pull it off the pay-per-view. And he basically, according to Bob Arum, Teo turned it down. And basically, Bob Arum basically went on a rant earlier today and said, we gave him everything he wants. Who does he want to fight? Let us know who he wants to fight, how he wants to fight, how much he wants to fight. We'll do the negotiation. But until then, I'm not even dealing with this guy. I said all along, George Kambosos broke him when he beat him, and he hasn't been the best ever since. I mean, he got a win for a fake junior welterweight championship over Josh Taylor, which was irrelevant. Didn't look good against Jermaine Ortiz in a fight that some people thought Ortiz was robbed. And of course, he carries Steve Clark at the distance unnecessarily. This is not a good look for Teo, especially when your top promoter, one of the better ones, maybe a boxing history, comes out and says the things that he did about you. It might be time for you to start doing some soul searching within yourself, because I said you were broke when you was beat by George Kambosos, and basically you've been irrelevant ever since, despite winning fake championships and not real championships. That's where you've been a lost cause ever since. Now you come up with some bizarre looking outfit, posing with a belt at the Ring Award ceremony that took place just recently. It's not a good look for Teofimo Lopez right now. And I said all along, the guy just recently ducked Boots Enos. I mean, the guy got smacked in the audience by Terrence Crawford after he called Crawford out every chance he got. He even tried to call out for fights against Tank Davis and Devin Haney. They've went south. So he's doing all the ducking right now. And until our two eyes see it, he's basically irrelevant. We'll deal with him later. And of course, the news took place this. I was yesterday morning or this morning. I can't remember because I slept for the most part. Was the official announcement of and also the official press conference for the rematch between Artur Beterbiev and Dmitri Bivol. Both guys I thought exude a lot of confidence. I think listening to Dmitri Bivol, I think he sees an opportunity to maybe right the wrong I thought he had in the first fight, where I thought he should have gone after Beterbiev a little more, because I thought there was opportunities there that he let slip away. I mean, he was fantastic with his jab per usual. He controlled the ring for the most part, but I thought he had a chance to open up more with multi-punch combinations, because Beterbiev was there at times to be taken, and he didn't capitalize. And that's where Beterbiev started to come on late in the fight, and basically, in my opinion, after a bunch of rewatches, took the fight from Bivol and won the decision in the end, because he won the last 5 rounds to win it. I think the comments is going to be, will Dmitri Bivol step his game plan up a little better this time? Because there were times I thought he fought a little too conservatively, even though I get why some people thought he won the fight, because there were times Artur Beterbiev didn't do much. But I think this is going to come down to who's going to seize the opportunity more, because I thought not just Bivol, but also Beterbiev had opportunities to really make a mark on this fight the first time, and I think both guys dropped the ball. I think that whoever puts a foot down and shows the other who's the man is in this fight will be the winner of the rematch coming up in February. It's over, in Saudi Arabia, part of the Riyadh season, yada, 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 yada. A so-called stacked card, which I'll divulge into when we get closer to the event. And of course, when we talk about light heavyweights like Bivol and Beterbiev, today is a landmark moment. It took place nearly 77 years ago today in Cleveland, Ohio. It was the conclusion of the trilogy that involved arguably the two greatest light heavyweights of all time, Ezzard Charles and Archie Moore. The first fight was basically controlled by Ezzard Charles for the most part. He won the decision. It was a good fight, but from everything I saw on the footage, Ezzard Charles controlled it. He was slick. He was slick. He was able to control the ring. We talk about ring generalship. Charles showed it. The second fight that took place almost exactly a year later over here in Cincinnati, Ohio, which is basically Ezzard Charles' hometown. A much competitive fight, both ways. Charles gets the majority decision, with the difference being a left hook to the body that floored Moore in the 8th round. But it was a great back and forth fight all time in that light heavyweight division. Good scrap. And Charles got the majority decision. Of course, there were some weird accusations about Moore possibly being on PEDs. And I guess he had some supposed, quote, rumor, end quote, again, question the validity of it, that said that he put poison in the water of Ezzard Charles' corner. Of course, back then, the stuff you do in corners was a lot more different than it is today, where everything is now closely watched. But that's what the accusation was back then. And because of everything that happened, it prompted the third fight that took place 77 years ago today in Cleveland, Ohio. We're talking about an aggressive fighter versus an outstanding counterpuncher, both known for their punch, and their knockout records show, especially when we consider Archie Moore amassed over 130 knockouts, which we're never going to see again. And Ezzard Charles had his own share of electric knockouts. Going into this fight, because Moore was a top, basically is for some kind of title eliminator at the time. The question was going to be, can Archie Moore finally get over the hump against the guy who beat him twice? And can Ezzard Charles can basically just put to closure this trilogy on why he was a better man of the two? Turned out to be a very, very good fight. Both guys gave their all. Moore had his moments. Charles had his moments. Of course, both guys who are known for their punch showed it. Charles maybe a little bit more on the slicker side, and maybe sometimes more aggressive, opened up as the rounds went on. But going into the 8th round, it looked like Archie Moore finally had his moment when he hurt Charles with a left hook and started to pour it on a little bit until Charles found a way to recover. Then out of nowhere, a counter right cross right on the chin of Archie Moore. and Moore is down and out for the count. And Ezzard Charles clinches the 3-0 trilogy over Archie Moore. And basically, it was a pretty solid trilogy, despite the 3-0 result, because in the second and third fights, both Charles and Moore had their moments. First fight was more controlled by Ezzard Charles. Ezzard Charles never got that world title shot for various reasons. You guys can, in the boxing community, can divulge to the reasons. A lot of it involves sensitive stuff, as I've said on my shows before. I will not divulge into it because I don't use this platform for it. But Archie Moore, did eventually go on to win the light heavyweight championship at age 39. You could probably argue Charles had the better peak of the two, but Moore probably had a better, maybe a higher floor, if you will call it that, because he was probably one of those original cases at the time, because this was never thought of in our sport, where a fighter gets better as his career went on, more of a so-called late bloomer, because that's what Archie Moore was. He kept pushing and pushing and pushing until he finally got Joey Maxim in the ring at age 39 to win the light heavyweight championship of the world. Now, of course, when we talk about some of the great light heavyweights, these are probably regarded as a top two. Let me remind people, some people put Moore over Charles because, Moore had the title, Charles didn't. Circumstances, reasons, Charles was not given the chance to fight for the title, a la Sam Langford. But remind you, Charles beat Moore 3 times, and another common opponent, Charlie Burley. Moore lost to Burley, and Charles beat him twice. Maybe you can argue is that Charles might have had the better peak of the two. Moore might have had a better back end because he was more of the late bloomer of the two of them. Of course, Charles went on to venture his career as a heavyweight, won the heavyweight title from Jersey Joe Walcott in the part of a 4-fight series with him, beat Joe Louis in one of his defenses, albeit a faded Joe Louis, lost his title to Walcott, gave Rocky Marciano 2 of the toughest fights of his career. The only fighter who went the full 15-round distance with Rocky Marciano was Ezzard Charles in their rematch. Actually had Marciano beat up a little bit because his nose was split in half. So there's your distinguished career of Ezzard Charles. Probably at in the pound-for-pound rankings all time, probably in the top 50. Same with Archie Moore. So he won the title from Joey Maxim. A couple other times he ventured into heavyweight, got beat by, of course, Rocky Marciano being one, Floyd Patterson being another. Career ended when he lost to then Cassius Clay, better known as Muhammad Ali. That was Archie Moore. So we talk about some of the all-time great light heavyweights. Those two are probably widely in the top 2. You could throw in a guy like Billy Conn up there. Could be argued Conn had the greatest peak all-time at the light heavyweight division, but Charles expanded a little longer of the two, so Charles probably gets the nod over Conn. We talk about Archie Moore, a guy known as the Phantom of Philly. The great Tommy Loughran is in the conversation. Probably the top 5, top 6. You could throw in of course, Sam Langford, as we talked about. Never fought from lightweight to heavyweight. Never had a chance to fight for a title in one of the most criminal acts. You know what the reason why it is? Again, you guys can look it up yourself. I'm not going to use this platform for the sensitivity part of it. And I can go on and on about some of the other guys. Maxie Rosenblum was a good one. You could obviously Gene Tunney, Michael Spinks. Probably the end game for me was Spinks when he unified at light heavyweight, because no one stood out in that division for me to be in that upper category. Of course, you could throw in a guy like Joey Maxim, who of course got the win over Sugar Ray Robinson, but largely because Robinson was about to die in heat exhaustion, but still doesn't deter the fact that Maxim is an all-time great light heavyweight. You could talk about maybe a guy like Willie Pastrana or Billy Misk. How about Jose Torres? He was a good light heavyweight too. The problem there was he lost 2 fights to Dick Tiger. Of course, the first one was a shocker at the time because Torres was one of the custom model projects. Tiger beats him to become the undisputed light heavyweight champion of the world. Again, in the one belt era where one belt did it all. And basically, of course, Tiger loses the title to another standout, the great Bob Foster. Tall, lanky, light heavyweight who had a left hook that could just put you down and out anytime you wanted, like he did to Dick Tiger. 14 successful title defenses against 13 different fighters. Still a record in that division all time. There's even some brutal guys in the division like a Victor Galindez, a very, very strong fighter who was once a mandatory to Bob Foster, but because of boxing politics, Foster decided to ditch the belts. John Conte, for my English followers, you guys know who John Conte was, another contender for one of Foster's belts, solid fighter. And that pretty much is the end game there. Throwing a guy like a Jimmy Bivens up there, Harold Johnson, even a Harry Gribb. Everybody throws Harry Gribb in every conversation, who even though there's no footage of him. But if you want to throw Harry Gribb in the conversation, have at it. I mean, he was up there. Tommy Gibbons is another one. Georges Carpentier. Actually, Carpentier is a good one. He was a World War One pilot out of France, and was also an actor on top of it. Very stirring story. Georges Carpenter. You can, or it's pronounced Carpentier. I'm not good at my French. You can read that one. But maybe the tip of the iceberg for the light heavyweight division is none other than Cincinnati's own Ezzard Charles. No, I'm not putting my Cincinnati bias toward him. It's basically widely regarded across the boxing historians and the aficionados. You can look it up. I mean, there's a crime he never got a chance to fight for the title because of many reasons. The 3 wins over Archie Moore, the 2 over Charlie Burley. Of course, the career at heavyweight is well chronicled. But a lot of sound, solid light heavyweights at all time, going way back when, the end game for me cut off with Michael Spinks in the 80s, because that's when the governing bodies and everything became a mess in the sport, and that's where I cut it off. And I conclude when I talk about Ezzard Charles among the greats to come through here in the Cincinnati, Ohio area, because I get asked this a lot. Maybe the most recognized and most beloved, because we consider everything that's named after him in that part of the near west side Cincinnati, just west of around where TQL Stadium is. I mean, the guy has an apartment complex now called Ezzard Charles Apartments over there. I got a chance to tour it. In there in the middle is that statue, where his a statue of Ezzard Charles, his career, his accolades, his famous quotes. You talk about, he has a big graffiti, almost like a mural, right on top. It covers an entire complex. And of course, the street, if you guys in Cincinnati know, it was named after Ezzard Charles. Now, it was a couple years ago, I believe, they changed the park, Laurel Park in Cincinnati, to, Ezzard Charles Park, to honor just how great of a fighter, and not just a fighter, but a humanitarian he was. Ezzard Charles was actually a guy that promoted community responsibility. Actually spent time as a jazz musician here in Cincinnati, and was one of the most well-respected humanitarians, especially when you consider his own background, where he was in the military himself. Of course, how does he stack up with some of the all-time great Cincinnati athletes and icons? Probably up there. We talk about, of course, the big O, Oscar Robertson, known for his collegiate career here, and of course, when they played then for the Cincinnati Royals, now known as the Sacramento Kings of the NBA. Of course, in the boxing realm, the other guy, Aaron Pryor, aka the Hawk, probably the most vicious Cincinnati boxer of his time. Some people put him over Charles, but Charles has the greater recognition, the greater career and accolades that trump anything Aaron Pryor does. Of course, Pryor's career is cut short due to drug dependency on his own. But I'm not going to use that to deter the fact that he's a Cincinnati legend. Of course, with the baseball town being with the Cincinnati Reds, Charles does stack up with all the great baseball players. When you think of the greatest catcher of all time, Johnny Bench, his teammates of the Big Red Regime, notably Joe Morgan, Ken Griffey Jr., Tony Perez, and Ken Griffey Sr., get them mixed up, Tony Perez and Concepcion. I mean, that's a heck of Cincinnati icons up there. Of course, the broadcaster Marty Brenneman, who called Reds games for 4 decades. Before him, Al Michaels was the Cincinnati icon, like Ezzard Charles here, was the voice of the Reds from 1971 to 73. Of course, everybody knows Al Michaels, the standout NFL play-by-play commentator for many decades. Started his broadcasting career here in Cincinnati, calling the Reds. Also a Cincinnati icon when you think about it, before the great Marty Brenneman took over for over 4 decades. And of course, we talk about some of the other athletes here. Anthony Munoz of the Cincinnati Bengals, his teammate Ken Anderson, also among the Cincinnati icons. And maybe the capper here is recently here with FC Cincinnati, the soccer team, the great Luciano Lucho Acosta. Come back to here soon, Lucho. That is what the Cincinnati iconism was, and Ezzard Charles probably trumps a lot of that. I mean, think about it. Ezzard Charles, Aaron Pryor, Oscar Robertson, Johnny Bench, Joe Morgan, Ken Griffey Sr., Tony Perez, Dave Concepcion. Actually, I'm going to add this guy here, Barry Larkin, the standout shortstop for the Reds throughout the 90s. Of course, Ken Griffey Jr. came over here because he wanted to play for the same team his dad played for. He's definitely in the conversation. Anthony Munoz, Ken Anderson, and Luciano Acosta. Quite an impressive list of Cincinnati athletes that come through here. But what made Ezzard Charles stand out was not just who he was in the ring, but who he was in person in general. And he's being still well recognized here in Cincinnati because it was just not too long ago that park over there was named after him. I mean, it was known as Laurel Park. It's a small little, not the biggest park, like a small park. You do like some light walking because I was just there this past November. But it became from Laurel Park to Ezzard Charles Park to honor the great Ezzard Charles, and he deserves every recognition you can get. It was just a shame the guy never got a chance to fight for the light heavyweight title, although he did, as I said, get the 4-fight series with Jersey Joe Walcott to become the heavyweight champion of the world, and still managed a Hall of Fame career. Went to the International Boxing Hall of Fame in 1990. So whenever I think of Cincinnati sports, you know, aside of the big red machine, he's number one. I mean, his name's marked all over Cincinnati. You can't go to that part of the city without seeing Ezzard Charles all over the place. Ezzard Charles Drive, Ezzard Charles Park, Ezzard Charles Apartments. Of course, the graffiti. You can't over exude or overrate what his impact was. I mean, sometimes I think he's one of the all-time underrated fighters and underrated athletes that come through Cincinnati simply because nobody talks about him. They're too fixated with guys like Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase, who carry themselves like a bunch of you-know-what. Ellie De La Cruz, who brings electric but doesn't have the accolades. Ezzard Charles trumps all three of them collectively times 10,000 and is not even close because he did it the right way. Something Burrow, Chase, and De La Cruz hasn't done yet. I can go on and on about more about Cincinnati athletes, but that's why I always boast about Ezzard Charles every time somebody asks me about Cincinnati athletes, because he's the cream of the crop. And I gave you my list. That's the only list that counts. Nothing else matters. Why? Because they got the job done. They did it the right way, and he did it when it mattered. God rest your soul, the great Ezzard Charles. Actually, if you follow me the X platform after the show, I'm going to post a couple of the graffiti I talked about, as well as my venture to the Ezzard Charles Park. I mean, his legacy will forever be stamped here in Cincinnati. I mean, we have a street named after you, just like Charles and even Barry Larkin do. You're an iconic status, and they both deserved it. Man, I wish I could talk about Cincinnati sports like this again, but a lot of our fans just find a way to ruin it for a guy like me. I learned that the other day. So it was a bit of a unique culture here, and I've said I got a couple new viewers here. Just want to touch on my Ezzard Charles platform real quick before I wrap this up. We could talk about guys that win and guys that win the right way. That was Ezzard Charles. If you guys are out there in the Cincinnati area, especially the west side, you can find Ezzard Charles Park. I highly recommend you go out there because it's actually not a big park. It's a small park. It has all of his pictures, even the picture of the punch that knocked Archie Moore out, and one of them, I believe, and some of his great quotes, and a big statue of his. You just can't miss. It's basically like this. It embronzed the career and life of the great Ezzard Charles. If you're in the Cincinnati area and you're in that part of town, I recommend you go check it out. Not the biggest park in the world. No one's going to mistake it for the greatest park the city's ever seen or ever built, but it's something I would highly recommend because Ezzard Charles' impact is second to none here in Cincinnati, and I'll always put him over everybody else, no matter how hard you try. And no, Joe Burrow or Jamar Chase couldn't carry Ezzard Charles' jockstrap, period. Sorry, Cincinnati. I had to deliver that to you. And that will wrap up this nightly edition of Sirhan on X. I will be back tomorrow. Also, later on tonight, I will be in a Spaces group talking more NFL. I will share the world my trip to Ezzard Charles Park so you guys get a clue of just how great of a human being Ezzard Charles was here in Cincinnati here in a bit. But until then, hope everyone had themselves a wonderful 14th of January 2025. And hope everybody stays warm in these real frigid conditions because it's starting to be 0 here tonight. I got to stay warm here somehow. As you can see, I have this going. But until then, take care. Good night. God bless, and enjoy the rest of the day.